This is Monday, February 1st, 2021. I'm Mr. Turek. I'm presenting my vision for how to use Mars as a tool for change. I call this program Nova Terra Legatus, New World Ambassador, New World Representative. First, a little bit about who I am. Here's a fine black and white picture of me as a tiny kid with my tiny puppy dog underneath the chair there, growing up on a farm. And everything in this picture is part of our farm. So from the woods way out there in the distance, the cornfields before that, the apple orchards off to the right, my project building. It's actually a two-story structure there with a little chimney on top and a wood burning stove in it. This is where I got to play and experiment and realize that I didn't really want to be a farmer. I am the tiny tot in the wagon. My one and only older brother is in front, and he wanted to be a farmer. He became a farmer. I did not want to become a farmer. I destroyed our farm, really, more than anything else. What I did is decide I wanted to become an astronaut, maybe. So here I am around age 12, down at Kennedy Space Center in front of the vehicle assembly building. Inside it were the astronauts and the hardware getting ready to land on the moon. In fact, they already landed on the moon, some of them, and so other crews were in training. Okay, well, when I finished up the high school, I applied to 3 places and got rejected and put on the waiting list and panicked a lot as a high school senior. But eventually, Cornell took me off the waiting list. Ta-da! And I got a Bachelor of Arts degree in physics. And by the way, I'm the guy on the left in this picture. All right. Then I went off to University of Arizona, studied planetary sciences for a year, continued my fine tradition of destroying equipment as I've done throughout my whole life, like our farm. Then I became an aerospace engineer, and that's what brought me to California. Here I am in a hypersonic wind tunnel preparing an experiment for a missile defense system. And I had plenty of kill cards in my office wall there as well of things that I had destroyed by accident, I assure you, by accident. Eventually, I won the Cold War and was laid off from aerospace engineering. But even as an aerospace engineer, I was taking enrichment courses and such. So saw this robot once as a guest of NASA. I took some courses down at UCI. After I got laid off, then I became a teacher. But really, the significant thing is what happened in December 1989. I was on vacation and visiting with someone whom I highly respected and whose opinion I valued tremendously. And we were going for a walk, and at one point in the conversation, she turned to me and said, "Phil, do something." And my interpretation back then was I should be more than just an engineer in a cubicle drifting along in my life. So I went home and I pondered, and it took about a month and a half to work it all out. But eventually I decided I saw what the space program had the potential of doing based on the space race of the 1960s, and came up with the idea of using a mission to Mars as a tool for change, hoping to make the United States better in some respects from the way it is. So, no pictures to go with that part of my life, but that's where the change really took place, December 1989. And so, what did I come up with as an idea? I'm trying to use the space program to improve the quality of life, particularly in the United States, but a little bit more globally as well. We do have room for improvement in case you didn't notice current events. You missed the space race. In the upper left is a photograph of the Apollo 11 astronauts. And when they first returned from the moon, they were big rock star type national heroes, and they had a parade that spanned the world. They went from country to country and were honored and celebrated throughout. And then what? Then they retired. They weren't ever allowed to fly again because they were too valuable to risk dying in a future space mission. So they could write books, they could become advisors, but they didn't have a role to play in shaping society after that. What I am proposing is what I think is an upgrade from that, and having the people who go to Mars and come to Earth from Mars be elevated to the role of Martians. So they live there long enough to not just be an astronaut. And when they do come to Earth, they're not to just retire into obscurity or write books, but this is the active third part of the whole project is now they come here and do public service, they do public outreach, mentoring, they do what we always hope Martians would do when they come to Earth. That is to help improve the quality of life for us poor humans on this planet. All right, so I don't have a lot of world travel experience, unlike you students, but I do have a little bit of experience between North and South America. And based on my travels, I can't help but notice the difference in cultures between the United States and, for example, Brazil. So down in Brazil, their national heroes are the bandeirantes, the guys who would come over from Portugal and they'd extract all the slaves and gold they could from the jungle, and then they went back to Portugal. And that's very much the mindset of the culture that grew up there. And then in the United States, in comparison, like with Daniel Boone here, we packed up our whole families and the family dog and relocated and transplanted ourselves here in the new world to establish roots and a family. And that is a very different culture here in the United States from the culture that grew up in Brazil, all starting 400 years ago. From FDR's famous speech on the Four Freedoms as World War II got underway, here's some imagery that goes with those ideas. This is what we in the United States consider ideals of value to us. First Amendment rights you occasionally hear about, freedom of speech, and the rest you can read here. These are things that we value as a nation in our culture. Here's some artwork I spotted up along the Columbia River. I took this picture and it shows progress, and it's historical from left to right, is from past to future or present. And it's, great wealth, and the colonists and settlers, they're just really making good use of the natural resources of the United States. But if you look at the entire mural from left to right, it begins with the Indian woman and her son smoking some salmon. And you might happen to have noticed that there's no Native American man in this image. And it's kind of indirectly alluding to the, maybe you can even declare it as a stain on our historical record. So the Native Americans were a nomadic people that didn't uh, view land ownership as something that an individual held, whereas the European mindset was yes, and you stake out this plot of land and you fence it and you put a wall around it and you defend it. And so, of course, we from Europe values expanded west, and we completely pushed out the Native American way of life, and we did it kind of in a more brutal fashion than we should have. I mean, it's kind of, from our point of view, inevitable what we expanded, but it wasn't really the moral high road the way that we went and expanded. How about that? So that's kind of a little dark chapter on this. Another aspect is we have this whole period of slavery here in the United States. This is a monument to that that's actually in Africa. And you say, well, yeah, that was hundreds of years ago, and then we did the Civil War, and it's all done. But the truth is, it still affects us to this day. Here's from one of those PBS specials that was on about education and schools. What's it like here in the United States? And it's not nearly as good as it could be. We've got inequality. And you students watching this PowerPoint right now have basically reliably and good enough internet that you're able to stream this thing and watch me here talking away. The people who are not well off are not well off, and they wouldn't be able to stream this in real time the way you are right now. We have a lot more poverty than other developed nations that are, supposed to be our counterparts. When you're poor, when you're having to avoid the gangs in your neighborhood to get to school when there's no pandemic going on, that affects your ability to focus on learning. And I've taught in these places. I taught at a school that had the highest dropout rate in the nation. And only one out of every four of my ninth graders actually graduated. Okay, and that was not in our current school district, but that was in one of the districts here in this greater LA area, and that affects what you can do as a student. So, talking about Mars, just like the Bandeirantes set the cultural values for Brazil for the next 400 or 500 years, just as Daniel Boone and company set the cultural values for the United States for 400 or 500 years, so too it's believed that the founding culture of Mars will be the dominant cultural values for Martian society for the next 400 or 500 years as well. And so that gives us the opportunity to choose what kind of culture do we want to intentionally put on Mars? Do we want to send the football team to Mars and establish them there? Then that would be the dominant culture on Mars, period. Are we content if the Chinese government establishes the dominant culture on Mars? Do we want United States values to be the dominant culture on Mars? And what are those? Well, some people would object to some of this, but at least lip service, we claim we would like people to become free from major prejudices and be respectful of other people, respect other values. And so, therefore, by projection, that should be what we would hope the Martians would be like. We don't really want Martians to be biased for or against any particular subset of Earth's population. We certainly don't want to go to war with the Martians because in the movies that's always pretty deadly. And these Martians, yes, they're just people that we have colonized on Mars, right? So I'm not saying that they're aliens. Thank you. I don't have much research to support what it takes to establish a culture on Mars. What I do have is just sort of, gee, what I can see when I teach in a 7 to 12 school setting, how influential the incoming class can be on the school culture, right? So, one out of the five grade levels, how much effect can they have? And what about turnover time? And what about the engineering part of this? How many people can we send to Mars at once? What kind of ships? All right. So there is aerospace in here. And so what I did is I looked at what's kind of near term possible using something like Bigelow inflatable habitats and putting 6 people in each of 2 habitats and have them rotate about their mutual center of mass to create artificial gravity for the trip out, and voila, you've got a dozen people traveling to Mars each opportunity, which only comes once every 26 months. So if you leave some people on board the ship, some are astronauts, some are settlers. If you can get 9 people to stay on Mars per cycle, and then eventually, as the settlement builds up, start bringing people back. So in about 8 or 9 cycles, based on those other criteria I set out, or in about 18 years, you could have a stable Martian society established. Here's a graph that says the same thing as that table. So the green line is the total population of Mars. And if we can get it to be stable at a little over 50 people, then even though we might be swapping out 9 people every 26 years, that's still enough to carry over a permanent Martian culture, is my claim. There are many pieces to this puzzle that I worked out. I put all of this into a one 10-page letter that I mailed off to the Vice President of the United States 30 years ago. And here's one piece of that puzzle. It says, okay, what if you're in college and you are just getting a degree? Well, we want people to go to Mars to be well-rounded and not overly specialized. So how about if we give them a set of exams? And if you do really well on the exams, we'll pay for you to, we'll give you scholarships. Go earn 2 additional master's degrees. And they can be in totally different subjects. That would be great. And if you don't qualify, then at least for choosing to take the exam and doing not too bad, uh, maybe you can get involved with the Earth side of preparing for this whole project. So this is just at the college level incitement, and then there's enticement, I should really say, and then there's many different little strings I'm trying to pull to make this whole project work across our society and make changes across our society. So one aspect of it is with you students, getting you out and about, exploring more of our Earth, becoming more attuned to various cultures, ethnicities, cultural values, becoming respectful of nature and science and other people. And eventually, you get done with all that, you still have to become qualified as an astronaut. And then beyond that, qualify as someone who actually settles on Mars. And while you're there, do things like conservation, so maybe help figure out how to how we can better care for life here on Earth by nurturing life that we transport to Mars as maybe part of all this. And then here's the part that is really missing from Mars missions. It's great. What do you do once you've got people living on Mars? And from my point of view, the answer is the most important part of all is to have this new culture, this new society, one that we aspire to make better than ourselves. Have them come to Earth and not to make war with us, but to mentor us, to guide us, to participate with us in improving the quality of our own lives here on Earth. Helpful, friendly Martians, helpful Martians. There you go. Here's just the imagery from the first phase. So you students, you explore the Earth, you take notes, you keep journals as you experience more and more of the world. You go to Mars, you work with unmanned rovers, you look for signs of ancient life on Mars, and you establish that permanent Martian culture of cooperation and tolerance and respectfulness. Uh, Another little piece is drawing in direct student and public involvement with people on Mars. So here's an 8th grade biology class directing astronauts on Mars, how they would search for life on Mars. You know, what clues do we think you should look for? And just work up to the grade levels, starting with the kindergartens, and saying, oh, try Reese's Pieces and see if ET comes along. Doing public interest things up there, like historically visiting a landing site for cultural reasons. Now, this piece of the puzzle I want you to pay most attention to. When the first Martians come to Earth, much like the first Apollo astronauts coming from the moon, we might be concerned about some bug or germ being brought back and leading to some deadly pandemic. So we quarantined the astronauts for 3 weeks in a trailer, and they weren't allowed to get out until we were convinced that it was safe. I would expect that the first Martians coming to Earth would also be quarantined out of similar fear. And so the question is, how do you reintroduce Martians, people who originally were students growing up here and then went to Mars, these Martians now, how do you reintroduce them to the United States? And my brilliant plan was, aha, put them in a modified, like hermetically sealed railroad car, put them on the back of Amtrak trains, and let them see our Purple Mountains majesty, our amber waves of grain, and see the United States, okay, from their train windows while they're in quarantine and while they're acclimating. So the red lines are Amtrak train routes in the United States. The bottom right image is showing how the public could participate in the discussions carried out by Congress. So the public can, on vacation, choose to travel by train and explore the different routes, and kids are involved in making assessments about, gee, I think this route should go and see these sites, and this route should, So my brilliant plan was to have Congress figure this out. And I just gave them a few rules. I said, okay, look, Congress picks where the Martians start from, but that whatever route they take, it should at least pass through Iowa, which is just like a centrally located part of the U.S. instead of all bunched up on one coast or never, going across the U.S. And that the Martians, when they are finally able to exit this train car, should disembark at Union Station in Washington, D.C., where they walk up a short distance. I've done it with my students to the Library of Congress, where they submit their journals and really continue the work of mentoring and public service here on Earth. So Martians are here at last. It was the role of Congress, I suggested, to debate and select the routes used by the first Martians to come to the United States. Okay, so what have I done in the 30 years since I got inspired to, do something? I did get, I became less introverted by necessity. So my congressman at the time is over here on the right, and another person on the left, and there were 6 of us total that actually started a society for this stuff, and I was involved with that for a while. Uh, Wrote a bunch of papers, did some presentations, including with Mr. Jernigan in Washington, D.C., back in 2015 or so. And there's a YouTube video of our presentation. They didn't spell my name right, but it's out there. It was presented to the Mars Society. I certainly dispatched students on field trips, trying to learn about the Earth and involved with robotics, of course. Set up the aerospace engineering course at our school, co-founded astronomy night with Mr. Jernigan and another teacher named Mr. Boschman. But what about you students? Okay, so here I am, kind of old in my life, sort of approaching retirement. This was a fine idea, but what can you students do in your lives with your own ideas? I would suggest that try to do good in the world, build a positive support network, be very visual in what it is you want to do, and as disgusting as it might sound, consider public service. Right now, it's not held in very high esteem to be a politician. that could be improved. You could contribute to making it better. Keep in mind that as far as society on Mars goes, it can be improved from what we are here today. When the United States set up new governments in Japan and Germany, we did not make them like our own. We tried to make them something that would work a little better. And our republic was based on the fact that you can't communicate with everyone all at once back then. But today, we actually can create with everyone all at once. So maybe that could become better incorporated into whatever form of government is set up on Mars. And it's becoming more apparent to me that the government aspect is a necessary component of making this whole project work. Uh, so, some things are here in the United States, at least, you've got all these different subgroups that you need to worry about. Down here at the bottom, I mentioned gracious professionalism. That's from our robotics competition. We fiercely compete. So we build robots and we go to these meets and we fiercely compete to have our robot win. But the atmosphere there is gracious professionalism. And that means when your competitor has a dead battery, you go out of your way to help them and you lend them a spare battery that you have. Or if a cable breaks, or if this happens or that happens. And it's a very supportive, competitive environment there. Wouldn't it be great if Congress got back to being modeled like that? Gracious professionalism. Okay, so things not to do, and these have all gotten stressed these past several years in particular, but don't do stuff like what you see on this slide. It's just not helpful. Keep in mind that there is no labor on Mars right now, so they have a huge need for labor, given that there's 0 people on Mars right now. So their immigration policies might be a little bit more open door than what we've been doing lately. Here's something where, haha, one of you students has been kind of tinkering with me on this one. So please ask any teacher on the West Coast of the United States that you encounter, what is WASC? It's the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, and basically it's a formal process for accrediting schools and colleges. I'm going to delay our 3-minute break while I finish my PowerPoint here. So here's a visual of WASC, and it begins in the upper right with studying yourself and interviewing parents and students and faculty and staff and figuring what is it about our school that works well, what is it that doesn't work well, what is it that we can do to improve ourselves. And then, like what's going to be happening pretty soon, bottom right, is we're going to be visited. And the visitors are really representatives from other schools, plus 1 or 2 facilitators. And they're going to come out for several days and interview and verify that what we learned about ourselves is accurate. And they're going to make a bunch of recommendations and then leave. So the red bubble on the left, the follow-up, is where we debrief ourselves and say, oh, they noticed that we really should have more opportunities for students who don't want to go to college to become successfully employed in our society, whatever it is they recommend. And then we try to implement it, and the cycle repeats. It's on a 2 to 6 year time period. So in a few months or weeks, we're going to be visited as part of a WASC accreditation. Now, this bullet is a new one. This is from a social progress index where an organization tries to assess the quality of life for different nations. And what you're looking is at the top scoring nation in the world. It's not the United States. Each little bullet here is color coded. So yellow means it's average. Blue means it's above average, and a blue circle means it's really above average. There's only one blue circle here, and that's under equality of political power by gender in the bottom right section there. So this particular country is really good for that. Red means it's below average, and a red circle means it's really below average. So greenhouse gas emissions is something this particular nation is worse than the others are doing. But being average is the winner here in the United States. I'm sorry, here on this planet. And what I would like to do is have a WASC type of purpose with a scorecard, maybe structured after this, for the Martians who come to Earth to be in a helpful role. Okay, so this might be part of that mechanism. So there's the end of our 3-minute break. Again, you'll get that after I finish here. I am of the opinion that our Congress in particular is not functioning very well these days. In the 30 years from when I first tossed this out there, it seems like it's become more hyper polarized and greater gridlock and less gracious professionalism and negotiation about things. At the moment, it's more like red states versus blue states, this tribe versus that tribe. And no, if we're in control, we're going to dictate where the train goes, and it's never going to touch, in your area. So that's not what I wanted at all. What I really wanted was for Congress to represent the will of the people instead of Congress influencing the attitudes of the people. And so I'm proposing a project for you students where you bypass Congress because it seems perhaps unable to do its role, and you try to gather what would be the will of US citizens for the route to be taken by the first Martians coming to Earth. Okay, so here's what I originally wrote 30 years ago to the vice president. I was so excited. I wrote, the route that Congress comes up with will be a convolution of the locations of America's scenic wonders and American politics. Future students of American politics will take courses that delve into ferreting out the behind the scenes interplay of power that led to a particular zig or a zag in the final route selected for the educated man, which is how I referred to him back then. The senator in this state had to support the bill sponsored by the senator in that state to get the train to pass through this congressional district. But that meant that, dot, dot, dot. And of course, today I'm referring to the Martian ambassadors, not the gender specific educated man. So that's missing. And this train doesn't have to be just an Amtrak car. It can be decked out, old fashioned style, ultra modern style, probably just hermetically sealed no matter what. But it can be a comfortable experience, a pleasurable experience as well. And what is it that they're actually going to see? So there's the environmental side effect of this whole project that says, well, if you have Martians coming to Earth, we probably want to impress them with how well we've been taking care of the Earth while they were living on Mars all those years. Here is the input from you students from last week that says there exists a we recognition program within the AP Central coursework. And it's got requirements for the teacher, but it also has requirements for the students. And here I just copied and pasted them. Says you must do research and investigation, come up with an action plan, and actually take action and complete your service project, report it, celebrate it, and throughout the year, record and reflect on your data and your project. Okay, so, and by the way, under the action plan, you might already read, it says, including one local or national action and one global action applied to a real world issue. For AP Physics C, they don't really have a suggestion. And I do point out there is physics involved with bringing Martians to Earth. Here's an example slide from this past Saturday's space settlement lecture about how much radiation shielding you would need in equatorial low Earth orbit as opposed to deep space using different materials. So what I'm asking you students to do is to believe that there are US citizens who are not so heavily polarized that they can engage with gracious professionalism, by the way, in negotiating with other US citizens throughout the country in coming up with a suggested route, something Congress doesn't seem to be capable of doing very well these days. But can you students reach out, maybe through the Mars Society, maybe through the National Space Society, maybe through Model United Nations, in which case, in that case, you're really dealing with other high school students in different parts of the country and saying, okay, uh, what's your vote? What's your recommendation? Um, should the Martians go here? Should they go there? How much time should it take? Is it one Martian? Is it the whole group on one route? Are they splitting up? So there's some physics in aerospace engineering involved with that part of it. How many people are we talking about? Here's my final slide. It's a few years old now, but yes, image of our science department. This is a diverse group. They work well together as a team. We would like our better features to be incorporated on a Martian society and become helpful here on Earth.